Hello, and welcome back to Desert Trippin'. In our previous video, authorities had rounded up 17 members of what they thought was just an unkempt and unruly hippie car theft ring. If you haven't seen that episode yet, I suggest you go back and watch it now, before we go any further. Go ahead, we'll wait for you. Okay, that's better. Now let's pick up where we left off. The pre-dawn raid on the hippie camp had been quite a success. And with so many of the outlaw hippies now behind bars, local authorities were optimistic that the recent wave of auto theft, arson, and other criminal activities would now be coming to an end. But they still didn't have the ringleader, and more importantly, they had no idea of the much more heinous crimes the group was responsible for. Little did they know that just a few days later, everything was about to change. Because on October 12, 1969, a smaller group of officers was sent back to Barker Ranch to retrieve some key evidence that had been left behind. The group was made up of CHP officer Jim Pursell and 3 park rangers. It was already late in the afternoon when they started up the canyon, and from the small number of officers, I don't think they really expected to find anyone still hiding out up here in the ranch. As the team was on this hillside, surveilling the area, Manson and 3 other male companions came hiking back to the scene. The officers were in plain view, just a few yards away, but they stopped moving and didn't make a sound. Here's a quote from an interview Jim Pursell gave about 25 years after the second raid on Barker Ranch.
On our last raid into the area, came to this spot, crouched down to keep the cabin under surveillance. Almost immediately, 4 male subjects walked right up the driveway toward me. If I moved, I was sure they would see me, so I just remained still, and they walked right into up the front porch and in the door to the cabin.
Now Manson and his companions were so deep in conversation, they never even noticed the officers, and they just went right up to the ranch and went in. At this point, the officers scrambled back down the hill, silently getting into position at each of the 2 doors. With his gun drawn, Pursell swung the door open, the gray rascals catching everyone by surprise. There was a small group of people sitting around the breakfast nook right here, and Charles Manson was sitting right about there. And as soon as he heard the officers burst in, he managed to slither down to the floor, and he slid into the adjacent bathroom, right over here. Once he was in here and out of the cops' direct line of sight, he was somehow able to squeeze himself into a tiny little cabinet right below the wash basin that used to be right here. You can see how small it was because look at that. Now Manson wasn't very big, only 5'4", but even at that size, it's still pretty hard to imagine how he was able to contort his body into such a small space, especially when you consider all the stuff that was under there, like the old drain pipe that used to go right through there. I mean, that's it. I mean, how would you even bend down? Pretty crazy. Okay, so the story would have ended right here, and Manson might have walked away a free man had Officer Pursell not gone back inside, grabbing the candle from the table to take one last look around. Because that's when he saw what looked like human hair sticking out of the cabinet below the wash basin. Now, Pursell didn't think the cabinet was big enough for anyone to hide in, but he had his .357 revolver drawn nevertheless, and he moved in to get a better look. At that point, there was movement under the cabinet, and Pursell watched in disbelief as the door slowly opened and an ominous figure began to emerge, eventually unwinding itself and standing up. The dark figure then looked up to greet the officer with a cheery, "Hello." When he asked it its name, the same cheery voice said, "Charlie Manson." Now that name meant nothing to Pursell, or to any of the other authorities out in the quiet desert community for that matter. You see, news traveled much slower in pre-internet America, and people out here in the desert didn't pay too much attention to all the crazy goings-on back in the big city. In fact, that's why most of them moved out here in the first place.
At the time of the homicides, my family and I were vacationing in Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado. The homicides did obviously make the news back there, but not to the extent of California. No, it was something in Los Angeles, considerable distance away, not something that involved us. Being as isolated as it was, there was nothing officially over law enforcement channels or anything like that.
Pursell brought Manson out to join the rest of the detainees, and he turned around to go back inside to take one last look, just to make sure there was no one else hiding in the cabin. Once Pursell went back into the cabin, a profound wave of fear washed over him when he saw Steve Clem Grogan, a much bigger man, standing across the floor near the one small bedroom. Grogan wasn't acting in a very threatening manner, but the fact that Pursell had unknowingly had his back to him the entire time he was dealing with Manson meant that Grogan could have easily killed him. Lucky for Pursell, no one in the family would do anything unless Manson gave the order, so Grogan just stood there, waiting for his turn to be processed. There were 9 people taken in the second raid, including Manson himself, and when you add that to the 17 people taken 2 days earlier, it makes a total of 26. Ironically, the authorities wouldn't know until a few weeks later that they had just apprehended the most wanted murderer in America. Because that's when one of the female detainees, Susan Atkins, was transported to Sybil Brand Women's Facility in Los Angeles. While she was there, she started talking to a couple of her cellmates, implicating herself in the brutal stabbing murder of 8 months pregnant actress Sharon Tate, and even sharing some details that hadn't been leaked to the press. Her half-witted confession connected Charlie and the family to the string of helter-skelter murders back in July, and eventually led to death sentences for everyone who had participated in the brutal killings. Without Charlie around to keep things going, the family fizzled out, and most of them went back to resume their relatively normal lives. Charles Manson died of natural causes in Corcoran State Prison on November 19, 2017. Susan Atkins died of brain cancer while serving her life sentence in 2009. Linda Kasabian, Barbara Hoyt, Kitty Lutzinger, and Stephanie Schramm all testified for the prosecution, which helped cement the guilty verdicts. As a result, Bobby Beausoleil, Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Tex Watson are all still in prison to this day, patiently awaiting their next chance at an appeal. This is highly unlikely, but you never know. After all, this story is full of strange twists and turns that you'd never believe possible. Well, that's our story for today. If you haven't already done so, make sure you murder that subscribe button so I know that you want me to continue creating content like this. In conclusion, I'd like to give a big shout out to all my current subscribers for all your support in helping me grow this channel. I hope we can continue this wild ride called YouTube. So until next time, this is Joe Bowie, DesertTrippin, wrapping things up at Barker Ranch, the favorite desert hideout of mass murderers everywhere. Over and out in 3, 2, 1!